Oswald was born in New Orleans. After serving in the U.S. Marines and living in Russia, he returned in the summer of 1963 to this area.
I was born in New Orleans in 1939. For a short length of time during my childhood, I lived in Texas and in New York. During my junior high school days, I attended Beauregard Junior High School. I attended that school for 2 years. Then I went to Warren Eastern High School, and I attended that school for over a year. Then my family and I moved to Texas, and I continued my schooling there. Then I entered the United States Marine Corps in 1956. I spent 3 years in the United States Marine Corps, starting out as a private, working my way up through the ranks to the position of buck sergeant, and I served honorably, having been discharged.
One of the most prominent peace groups was a pro-Cuba organization called Fair Play for Cuba. The New Orleans chapter of Fair Play for Cuba was manned by an ex-Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald. He was the only member of the chapter, and he was filmed passing out pro-Cuba literature on the streets. This activity led to a conflict with anti-Castro Cubans and to a series of television interviews in New Orleans.
You're a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
What kind of double game was Oswald playing? One piece of evidence has continued to raise important questions about Oswald's true attitude toward Cuba and whose side he was really on.
The leaflets that Oswald hands out on Canal Street is pro-Castro leaflets, hands off Cuba, telling the government to leave it alone, let it stay communist, let Castro alone. And the return addresses that are stamped on it is 544 Camp Street.
In that same building, there is a private detective agency by a man named Guy Banister. And Guy Banister is certainly not pro-Castro. He's an ex-FBI agent from New York who is a violently anti-Castro and working to overthrow Castro.
But according to one of Banister's secretaries, Delphine Roberts, Lee Oswald worked with Guy Banister in 1963 and was given an office in the Camp Street building to mount his pro-Castro campaign.
It's when the news accounts from Dallas were showing Oswald that Delphine said to me, well, you know, he was in this office, you saw him. And I told her that not to my knowledge. I didn't know that I'd seen him. To me, he would have been just another face in the crowd. And she was just calling my attention to the news in Dallas that this man had been in our office.
Also seen often in this office was David Ferrie, another fanatic anti-communist and CIA pilot. An employee of Banister's, Jack Martin, told Garrison confidentially that Ferrie left his home the afternoon of the assassination in a thunderstorm to drive to Houston, then Galveston. Questioned by Garrison in 1963, Ferrie denied knowing Oswald and said he'd gone to Houston to ice skate. Garrison turned Ferrie over to the FBI, who released him with an apology.
In New Orleans, the custodial group includes Mr. Ferrie, and he's one of the people who was helping to let Oswald be de-Dallasized, and secondly, acquire the identification as a communist, in quotes.
Having established Ferrie had lied about knowing Oswald and ice skating in Houston, Garrison officially but secretly opened his investigation.
We're approaching the old post office building, which is right across the street from the Newman building at 544 Camp Street.
What was there?
Well, this is the address which Lee Oswald gave for his first Fair Play for Cuba pamphlets. Now, this building, 544 Camp Street, is the building in which Guy Banister had his office on the side. Guy Banister, of course, is the most militant right-wing, extremely conservative, anti-communist individual in the city of New Orleans. There is simply no question about the fact that the Riley Coffee Company was a nesting place for Lee Oswald. He was put here. This was his CIA assignment. In other words, as I pointed out before, his immediate superiors in Dallas and his immediate superiors in the CIA in New Orleans are involved in the assassination. Not might be, they are involved. And consequently, the impression was created on his part that he was following orders and he just had to stay at the Riley Coffee Company until the time came when he was to penetrate the right-wing operation here, and in the course of doing that, to go through these motions of being a left-wing individual, a communist. This is one of the bases in New Orleans for United States intelligence operations, and they had a number of intelligence agencies here. We've confirmed at least one was here, so Oswald had been placed across the street, where he was obviously in some sort of contact with them. And then if you go around to the right, there's Riley Coffee Company. Here's the old post office building where U.S. intelligence agencies operated from. And if you go over here, you can see two men opening a truck. Now, if you go line over the truck, there's a white building. And that white building is the Newman building, which is at 544 Camp Street. And as I said earlier, that's where Guy Banister's office was. And David Ferrie hung around in Guy Banister's office. And, of course, Lee Oswald has been seen in Guy Banister's office.
The Garrison case began last February with David Ferrie, a strange man, commercial pilot, private detective, anti-Castro fighter, and bishop of an offbeat cult. Ferrie said Garrison had fingered him as the getaway pilot in the plot. 4 days later, he died mysteriously in this house. Here, according to Garrison, Oswald met Ferrie and members of the Minutemen, a secret and violent group who train with bombs and machine guns to kill communists. After Ferrie's death, 2 Minutemen arrived and took away